I'm going to share a few views and perspectives around inclusive leadership and link them to the findings of the research. But before I do that, I've got a couple of questions to ask. The first one is, who in this room works in an organisation where they have either a diversity and inclusion agenda, they have a senior leader that talks about it, or you've got something on your website that says that you're absolutely passionate about it? Okay? How many of you that have put your hand up are seeing a positive impact in the activity that you're doing to therefore result in a more diverse and inclusive workplace? Okay, too soon. We've got a couple. I was in a workshop a few weeks ago and there were 120 people in the room. I asked the same two questions. 120 people put their hands up to the first question. Senior leadership think this is really important. We've got this on our website. We do all these amazing networking events, And then I asked the question, how many are seeing a positive impact on this? And nobody put their hand up. And I think sometimes this can be the challenge for areas around diversity and inclusion that are also the issues around leadership. Because when I looked at the research and what we were saying were important, I can argue are absolutely what we should be focusing on from an inclusive leadership point of view. So let's stop from siloing all this activity and really focus on how we pull it all together. Now, in this research, we also asked the question about the diversity and inclusion training that people are using. I'd like somebody to put their hand up if the work that they're doing on diversity and inclusive leadership training is having a positive impact across their organisation. One. Okay. So I know an organisation that spent £3.4 million over the last 18 months putting every single one of their person across the world into unconscious bias training, which seems to be a little bit of a buzzword at the moment and has been for the last couple of years. And my God, I wish I'd got into that field because I would be a millionaire. And when I asked them the question, what impact has that had, they gave me two answers. First of all is we haven't measured it. So £3.4 million investment, they haven't measured. And secondly, they said, but actually listening to the conversations that happen in the room, all I'm hearing is people laughing when they're being totally biased, saying, oh, it's my unconscious bias, I don't know, I'm doing it. So they spent £3.4 million so that everybody can have a joke. This is what came out of the research that TLC did. So we were asking the question about the focus on leadership development, what subject matter have you invested the most resource in, time and money? And what's had the biggest investments? The diversity and inclusion had a 17% investment, most effective 9%. And I would argue that for many organisations that say that creating a more diverse and inclusive workplace is fundamental for their success and their strategy delivery, one of the key areas they focus on straight away is how we're going to deliver some D&I training, which will probably have some legality around it, we'll have some unconscious bias about it, we might have a few other bits and pieces in there. But actually, we're not seeing the impact of that training. And arguably, as L&D professionals, as talent professionals, all this work can be pulled into one area around inclusive leadership. Because what the research is telling us are your areas that are important are the areas that are critical for inclusive leadership and creating a more inclusive workplace for everyone. Before I show you that, I'm just going to show you and remind us of some of the key highlights around why creating a more diverse and inclusive workplace is paramount, regardless of where we are in the world. So if we think about the UK, we've got all the joy of the gender pay gap transparency work. So some organisations have started to report on their gaps. And many organisations I consult with tell me they're not going to do it till April because they want to see where the competitors are. But then for those in finance sector, we've got the Women in Finance Charter, which is a push to really create targets and that senior level commitment by saying, if we have a target to get more women into the organisation, the executive committee's pay is going to be affected by it if we don't hit it. And then we've got other shareholder and client expectations. About 3 or 4 years ago, Legal & General went very public and said, if we're working with an organisation and they don't have a diverse board, we're going to challenge them. And we might vote against them in their AGM. And the reason for that was they were concerned that we would get back into the world of groupthink. So if we had people that were very similar to each other at senior level, they were concerned that the level of governance and risk wasn't where it should be for such a big company, and therefore they would be concerned. So from a business point of view, that's absolutely paramount. But if we look at inclusion, and it links back to the conversation about emotional intelligence and emotional self-awareness, what Deloitte and others have found, that if you create that workplace which is, we've got different people with different views and points and perspectives, they feel included and they can share their views, Deloitte found that that boosts the ability to collaborate by 42%. Now, I will give £1 to any organisation that doesn't have collaboration somewhere within their business strategy at the moment, because the two buzzwords seem to be collaboration and innovation. And you can't innovate when you don't have different viewpoints, and you can't collaborate when you don't know how to make people feel included. So if you've got innovation and collaboration as part of your strategy, diversity and inclusion's got to be right bang in the centre of that to help you deliver it. Deloitte also found that having a more diverse and inclusive workplace increased innovation by 83%. Opportunity Now proved that if you had more inclusive leaders, it would increase their market share or their opportunity to get into other markets by 45%. And in a piece of work that PwC did, they found that 85% of chief execs were saying when we do diversity and inclusion right, it has a positive impact on bottom line. And that should be the same for us around all the work that we do with talent. Now, Deloitte did another piece of work, and this is US only, literally came out, it was either the beginning of this week or late last week. And they wanted to unpick that thinking around inclusion. Because many companies still think that diversity and inclusion is the same thing. It's just a phrase, when actually diversity is the difference and inclusion is making sure you get the best out of that difference, and didn't really understand the difference between the activity you need to do for both. So Deloitte did some analysis in the US, did a huge survey, some interviews, and really focused across corporate America around what does workplace culture actually look and feel like, and what's the impact. 80% of respondents said that inclusion was an important factor in choosing an employer. 80%. 72% said they would consider leaving an organisation to another one that was more inclusive. So when our senior leaders, God forbid, ever ask us again for the business case on why we should create a more diverse and inclusive workplace, why we should want to get that best talent that's out there and make the most of it, when they're asking for that business case, we can see that people will go somewhere else if they're not getting it in that company. And we also found that 30% of millennials have already left a job to go to a more inclusive workplace and a more inclusive culture. So 30% of those that were in the millennial bracket have already said, I left a company because it wasn't inclusive enough. I didn't feel that I could contribute and they were getting the best out of me, so I went somewhere else. And when they looked at reasons for leaving, and if we look back to some of the points that have been raised earlier about what came out of this research, these are pretty consistent with what we're saying is important. So reasons for leaving, the top 3, a desire to be authentic at work. So if I can't be myself, I don't want to be there. Didn't feel comfortable being myself at all. 33% of respondents said, I didn't feel comfortable, I couldn't play that game any longer. I had to move on. And they did not feel comfortable speaking up and expressing opinions. So if we're in a company that thinks collaboration's important, but so many of our people say, I don't feel comfortable speaking up and sharing my opinions, I'm not sure where the collaboration is in that. So this isn't about it being a nice fluffy piece. This is about being absolutely fundamental to what we do as talent leaders. Who's seen the Deloitte work on 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership? I can tell you anything then, can't I? I can tell you anything and you'll believe it. But Deloitte did that, carried on with this work and said there's 6 key elements to being an inclusive leader. And I'd like you to think about the conversations we've had today while I just give you a whistle-stop tour of what those 6 traits are. So first of all is commitment. That's about being consistent. So what you say, what you do. If you believe that diversity, inclusion, creating a workplace where you get the best out of everybody is important, you constantly talk about it and you deliver it. So it's believing that we get the best out of a diverse group of people and people that feel included. The second one, and we've heard about courageous conversations and being brave already today, but the second one is around courage. And the two traits within courage for inclusive leaders is, first of all, having an air of humility, so feeling comfortable talking about your weaknesses as well as your strengths. And the second one is asking for feedback and being comfortable giving feedback. And I know through the work that I do with senior execs, coaching them around how are they living and breathing these leadership traits, the giving and asking of feedback is probably the most challenging one they have. But this is a fundamental leadership skill for us. Cognizance here is about knowing what your biases are, knowing the things that really switch you off and frustrate the living daylights out of you on certain types of people, but being really clear the impact they have on your decision making, because this is about making the best and the most effective decisions for our organisations. Curiosity is wanting to know about people. So when we talked about emotional intelligence or emotional self-awareness, feeling comfortable wanting to talk to people and find out the differences about them, really being curious about their background, their insights, how they can contribute. Cultural intelligence is about, so it does what it says on the tin effectively. That's about understanding different cultures and the impact work can have on that, and the impact they can have on work. When I was at Nomura, please don't share this outside this room, we were really focused on hitting the Russian market, and we bombed spectacularly. It was the second go of getting into the Russian market that worked. And the key reason we bombed on the first one, because we didn't have anybody in the team that spoke Russian, we didn't understand the Russian culture, nobody had ever worked in Russia. What was really interesting was 2 banks down in the office were 3 people that spoke Russian, had worked in Russia, knew the culture. But we didn't think to expand our thinking on who we might bring in. So the cultural intelligence element here for teams and for organisations is paramount. And within leadership, it's critical for us to understand where do we go for that knowledge, that insight, and that great talent. And the final one is collaboration. So how do we collaborate effectively? And I see in many organisations, collaboration is, I'm going to sit here patiently and wait till you finish, and then I'm going to say exactly what I think because I haven't listened to you because I've been waiting to speak. And that's usually how good collaboration is in many companies. But without inclusive leadership and without that diversity of thought around the table, collaboration is absolutely pointless. Look at the research that you guys very kindly responded to. These are all the things that you said, and the other people that were part of the research that you said were most linked to your business performance and most needed to develop. All of those areas that are circled are direct traits, direct influences of inclusive leadership. So I would challenge many companies to ditch the D&I training, ditch it, and really focus on how can you embed all this thinking, these traits, into the leadership opportunities that you've actually got in your organisation, because they'll have the bigger impact than putting a lot of people through a £3.4 million project so that everybody can joke that they've all got unconscious bias.